My story began on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. Back then, the world was small, so small I thought freedom was just a word in a book. At Morehouse in the seminary, I learned to breathe not just with my lungs, but with my soul. I realized injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Before I was the man with a dream, I was just a boy named Michael. I loved my mother's fried chicken and racing neighbors on the red clay. Until one day, the world told me my skin was a wall. When I was 5, Dad returned from Germany. Inspired by Martin Luther, he came back and renamed us both Martin Luther. It was a heavy name. It meant reform, and it meant rebellion. My best friend was a white boy. When we were 6, his father told me we couldn't play anymore. I felt an invisible poison in the air. I started college at 15. I didn't want to be a preacher then. I thought the shouting in church solved nothing. I even doubted if God was there. In Boston, I met Coretta. On our first date, I told her she had everything I ever wanted in a wife. I just wanted to be a scholar. In 1954, at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, I was only 25. I came to Montgomery with my new bride, full of hope. I just wanted to be a good pastor and lead my congregation in peace. 1955, interior of a vintage bus at night. Rosa Parks sat down. Her nose shattered the silent night. After Rosa's arrest, they called asking me to lead. I hesitated. I was only 26, with a newborn daughter. I am no saint. I was just a father who didn't want trouble. I had only 20 minutes to prepare. I told the crowd, we are tired of being trampled by the iron feet of oppression. That night, I knew I could never go back. I was arrested for speeding. It was my first time in jail. In that damp cell, I felt real fear. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. One day, someone bombed my home. When I saw Coretta holding the baby amidst the ruins, the guilt almost broke me. My life has been a march toward that mountaintop. But should I really risk my family to get there? The boycott began. I watched my people walk miles rather than ride. Those worn-out shoes were medals of our dignity. After the boycott started, the threats poured in. One night, I sat in the kitchen, ready to quit. I prayed, Lord, I'm tired. I can't go it alone. In that moment, I heard a voice. Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you, even until the end of the world. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to die. Finally, we won. The Supreme Court ruled segregation unconstitutional. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. December 1956. I boarded the first desegregated bus and sat in the front. The seat felt soft, but it was bought with sweat. On September 1958, I woke up in my hospital bed. The doctors told me the blade was resting against my aorta. They said if I had just sneezed, I would have died. I felt no hatred for that poor woman. I only thought, God kept my breath so I could say the words yet unspoken. I was arrested again, in a sit-in at the restaurant inside Rich's, Atlanta's largest department store. I sat down with dozens of students in there. The chatter died instantly, replaced by the clink of silver on china. A man who won't die for something is not fit to live. At midnight, the police came. As the cuffs locked around my wrist, they shoved me into a car for a distant prison. It was pitch black. I didn't know if law or a lynch mob awaited me, but I knew I was no longer alone. July 1962, Albany. The judge gave me a choice, a $178 fine or 45 days in jail. $178. In 1962, that could buy many things, but not my principles. I told the judge, I choose jail. We cannot purchase justice by paying for injustice. I intended to stay for all 45 days. In that cell, I felt a strange peace. If you lose your freedom for the truth, then your soul is truly free. But soon after, they told me I must leave. Pritchett was smart. He knew a preacher behind bars was more powerful than a preacher on the street. In Birmingham jail, this was my 13th arrest. The walls of jail were cold and damp, no windows, only endless darkness. I had no proper paper. I picked up an old newspaper and wrote the truth about justice on the margins of news about order and law. I figured out that the Boston Tea Party was illegal civil disobedience and that, conversely, Everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. So, I stopped looking for legal excuses. I looked for a moral exit. One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. The law can be wrong, but conscience is always right. August 1963, Washington. The sun was fierce, but there was something hotter than the heat wave in the air. Hope. I walked toward the microphones. My briefcase held that heavy manuscript. I knew I was about to sign a check that belonged not just to black people, but to all humanity. That morning, I kept adjusting my tie at the Willard Hotel. Coretta wasn't there, and I felt a strange unease. Fear is not shameful. What is shameful is stopping because of it. Walking through the crowd toward the podium, I smelled sweat, dust, and hope. I felt every hand that touched me was a heavy entrustment. As I stood there, looking at those 250,000 faces, I saw not anger, but longing. Our republic has given us a bad check, and we have come to cash it. I began to read the prepared words, but I felt like a cold machine. Our republic has given us a bad check. The words were right, but they had no soul. Mahalia cried out from behind, "Tell them about the dream." I put the notes down. In that moment, I chose to be a preacher, not a speaker. I stopped caring about fancy words. I just wanted to tell them the world I saw. I have a dream that people will not be judged by the color of their skin. The applause was like thunder, but all I felt was a hollow exhaustion. The dream was spoken, but living it required more than words. Saint Augustine in 1964 should have been a vacationer's paradise, but the ocean breeze carried the scent of kerosene and hate. I could hear the slurs from the dark. I knew ambushes and clubs were waiting. If a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. I was in jail again, but this time was different. The world's cameras were fixed on us. The violence of St. Augustine became a wound that America could no longer ignore. June 19th. The news came over the radio. The Senate had passed the bill. A whole year of struggle, finally traded for a few lines of life-changing text. I looked at that black ink. I knew, the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. The road wasn't over, but we finally had our ticket. In 1964, the world gave me its highest honor, but my heart never left the mud of the South. That day, in Oslo, I took that medal, but I knew I was only a trustee for millions of nameless heroes. Peace is not merely a distant goal, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. 1965, Selma. There were batons and tears at the other end. I looked at the dust on my shoes, the stain on a nation's soul. We had to cross it to clean it. The hallways of D.C. always smell of cold furniture polish. I was here wrestling with Johnson's officials, pleading for an injunction to protect my people from the clubs in Selma. They spoke to me of legal procedures and jurisdiction, but I told them when a man is denied his ballot, no procedure should serve as an excuse for delayed justice. The talks led nowhere. I realized those in air-conditioned rooms could never smell the blood in Selma's mud. Laws exist to protect justice, not to be a veil for the oppressor. Many thought the South was hell, but it wasn't until I stepped into Chicago that I found an animosity that chilled the bone. The screams here were sharper than in Mississippi. I looked at those angry faces and realized this deep-seated hatred is harder to conquer than the legal segregation of the South. A brick hit my head. At that moment, the world spun. I knew with one gesture, my people would strike back, but I couldn't. True courage is not about not flinching from a stone. It is about refusing to throw one back for the sake of peace. I refused to fall, and I refused to stop. If I backed down, the bricks would win. I met Mayor Daley. I knew many wanted me to push forward, but I feared seeing blood in the streets more. Nonviolence means stopping before blood flows, even if it looks like retreat. I signed the agreement and canceled the march. Some called me weak, but I knew preserving life is far more important than winning a demonstration. April 1967, Riverside Church, New York. My desk was piled with letters telling me to shut up. Martin, stick to your own race issues. Leave the war alone. I looked at my notes. Friends warned me this would ruin my political future. I knew once I spoke, I could never go back to being everyone's favorite. But conscience told me, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. I told the world, My government is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. We are not there to liberate Vietnam. We are there to occupy it as a colony. I could not teach non-violence to young black men while my government used violence abroad. I spoke the truth, and I paid the price. The newspapers attacked me. The White House doors closed. But I felt a new freedom, the freedom of a soul no longer bound by lies. In 1968, my voice grew hoarse, and my dream grew heavier. I realized that if a man worries about his next meal every day, his right at the ballot box is like a scrap of paper. I began to call upon the forgotten not by color, but by suffering. I traveled the country, knocking on leaky wooden doors. I told them poverty has no color. What we need is an economic bill of rights. We were going to the Capitol, and we would sit there until they listened. This wasn't a riot. It was civil disobedience at its peak. We use our suffering bodies to wake a sleeping conscience. When my dream touched the pockets of the rich and the nation's wars, the applause died. But I couldn't talk about race without talking about the poverty that traps it. As I pored over legal texts late at night, I realized justice should have no borders. In 1968, I endorsed the call for a World Constituent Assembly to draft a world constitution. I no longer dreamed merely of black and white hands shaking, but of all humanity as a federation, sharing dignity under the same stars. We must end not just segregation, but the war machine that devours civilization. We were to convene a World Constituent Assembly to envision an Earth Federation without war. Justice knows no nationality. It is the collective breath of humanity. I began to wonder, what if the world had a common law? We must rise above the loyalties of our tribes and build a family that belongs to all mankind. When I look at this globe, I see no borders, only life. Injustice anywhere is a threat to global justice. If we do not establish world law, we will perish in the shadows of nuclear destruction. In the blueprint of that assembly, every child from Atlanta to Saigon should be protected by the same constitution. This is my new dream, a united Earth. I may not see it realized, but we have sown the seeds. We are all Earth's children. In Memphis, room 306 at the Lorraine Motel had become my second home. Ralph and I stayed here so often they called it the King Abernathy Suite here. I wasn't a leader. I was just Martin complaining to an old friend about a tight tie. The wallpaper was fading, and the air held the dampness of the South. 6 p.m. The sun was sinking. I stepped onto the balcony, and the air was finally cooler. I saw Ben Branch below, adjusting his instruments. Suddenly, a loud crack. I didn't feel pain, just a violent impact. I tried to stand firm, but the earth was slipping away. Ralph rushed out. I heard him calling my name, but the voice was far away, like it was behind a thick mist. I knew then, that long march up the mountain, I had finally finished it, although it was a shame that I didn't get to hear him play Take My Hand, Precious Lord. I don't mind longevity. I've been to the mountaintop. The rest of the way belongs to you. Remember, the dream doesn't need me. It needs every one of you. Now please follow us and subscribe as we explore more stories that change the world. Thank you for watching.